Okay, and I think we are live. So hello everyone. If you were just with me for the TV and film wrap up for August, welcome back. For those new here, my name's Nicki. I'm an author and editor, and I post videos on YouTube about writing, editing, reading, and all the other things I love. It's the reading we're here for today because always at the end of the month, I like to do a little quick wrap up of the books I've been reading and what I thought about them. So we've got about 20 odd books to get through this month, about average for what I read a month. So I will crack straight on. Let's get rid of this banner so I'm not chopping off half my face. Right. So first up, I read And Then by Soseki Natsume, who is a fairly famous Japanese writer. I've read a couple of his books already, Boccia being one of them. And I've liked all his works I've read so far. So this is the third, as I said. It's a psychological character study that also considers the difficulty in reconciling, I guess, traditional Japanese values with the increasing westernization and modernization that's happening at the turn of the 20th century. It's a topic that a lot of writers at that time deal with, and Soseki does it particularly well. This was a 5-star read for me. If you haven't checked out any of his works, I definitely recommend them. And this is probably a decent one to start with, I'd say, as well. But Boccia is perhaps one of his most famous ones, but it's a little bit different tone. I think this one is a good one to start with. It's not too long either. Next up, I read a NetGalley read, this one, The Fallen Angel by Tracy Borman, which is the third and final book in the Francis Gorge trilogy. So it's historical fiction, and it's set in the James I court, so early Stuart England. This was 4.5 stars for me. I thought it wrapped up the story really nicely. I enjoyed how they took things with the characters. There was still a little bit of action and suspense, wondering how things were going to work out and if things were going to take a bad turn for Francis at one point. So it's not one I'd go into unless you've read the first ones. This is one of those trilogies where I think it would make better sense to read them in order. You can't just dip in and out. Otherwise, a lot of what's going on will not make sense, as there's plenty of references back to the earlier 2 books during this one. But if you're a fan of historical fiction and the Stuart era sounds fun, give it a try. It's sort of caught up in the ideas of wise women and being mistaken for witches, and you get a little bit of some of the Catholic plots, that's including the gunpowder plot in book 1. So if that interests you, give it a try. Sticking with the historical fiction and sticking with NetGalley, I read Olav Audunsson by Sigrid Undset. This is the first book in, I think it's a 4 books series. And it's a medieval family drama, essentially. Now, I loved her previous work that's similar, Kristin Lavransdatter, which I think is better than this one. And I think that's just because I really enjoyed Kristin as a character. Olav, I liked him in the first part of the book, which is told from his POV. However, in the second part of the book, we swap to his wife's POV. I say wife in that sort of odd way because there's a bit of discrepancy over who considers them man and wife and who doesn't. And from that POV, he became somewhat unlikable, which for me kind of ruined the excitement. The first part was kind of he's the hero of his own saga, if you like, but the second part showed him in a less positive light. It was enjoyable. It's good historical fiction. Sigrid Undset writes that period of Scandinavia really well. But for me, it lacked the enjoyment of Kristin Lavransdatter, I guess. So if I was going to pick one to tell you to read of hers, it would be that one. Jenny's also good, but Kristin Lavransdatter is my favourite of her works. Nevertheless, I still gave this 4 stars. It was still an enjoyable read. Moving on, something completely different, still from NetGalley though. This was A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. And this is the first book in, I think it's going to be a trilogy. And it's set in a magical school. Now, before you're put off by that, this is not just another take on Harry Potter. This school isn't so interested in training you and giving you a safe environment to learn magic. it's basically you've passed if you manage to survive through your years there and exit the school at graduation time. If you don't get killed in the meantime, then you've passed. So it's a bit of a deadly environment, hence the deadly education title of the first book. I found this really entertaining. I liked the premise, thought the world building was good. The characters are dysfunctional, but in a really engaging and entertaining way. And I ended this book really keen to find out what would happen in the next part. So definitely worth watching, or worth reading, especially if you are already a fan of Naomi Novik. But even if you haven't read her works before, this is a really nice introduction piece. It's well written, easy reading, comes across really well. I should say I give it 4.5 stars, sorry. Next up, still sticking with NetGalley for now, I read Master of Poisons by Andrea Hairston. This was only a 3-star read for me, unfortunately. It's a fantasy, and there were lots of things that really recommended it. It's got a lot of great inclusion for LGBT, people of colour, and I really wanted to like it more than I did because it had so much going for it. The storyline sounded interesting, but at the end of the day, I really failed to fully engage with it. I kind of was skimming through. I wasn't deeply invested in the characters. So I would give her absolutely 5 stars for what she was trying to achieve, because I think it was really inclusive, and the prose was lyrical and interesting and quite beautiful. It was just that the story and characters just didn't captivate me in the way I needed to be captivated for this kind of book. So, as I said, it was about sort of a 3.5 stars for me. Still sticking with NetGalley, I read Brimstone Bound by Helen Harper, the first book in an urban fantasy series. This one was really enjoyable. I haven't read any all-out urban fantasy in a little while, and it was fun to get back into that kind of world of werewolves and vampires with plucky heroines. And this was a 4.5 star read for me. I really enjoyed the premise. Basically, our female lead is training to be a policewoman or a detective, and as her last stage of training, she's assigned against her wishes to the supernatural division. Only a day or so into that, she is unfortunately murdered, only to wake up on the mortuary table later. So from there, she's trying to solve who murdered her and her temporary partner, and what's happened to her and why she's returned to life. Along the way, she's aided reluctantly on her part by the leader of the local vampires. So there's plenty of options for some future romance going on there. There was lots of action and adventure, and it was entertaining, as I said, from start to finish. So I definitely would continue reading this series and find out what happens to her next. The next book I received as an ARC, but from the publisher rather than via NetGalley. It's Flyaway by Kathleen Jennings. Now, this is an Australian author, and it's a modern Gothic Australian fairy tale / mystery / horror story. And I think maybe that's its problem. I think it tried to be too many things. For me, it was a 3.5 star read. I think it had a lot going for it. The prose was nicely written. And in terms of, it's a really easy, light read. It's fairly short. I liked some of the elements. However, I just never really cared again about the story and characters. I was only ever sort of skimming over the surface. I didn't really get deep into the story, which is why for me it was only 3.5 stars. But if that kind of premise appeals to you, a sort of modern Gothic Australian fairy tale, then definitely give it a look. Next up, borrowed from the library, I read Modern Japanese Short Stories. So this is a collection of essentially early 20th century, first half of the 20th century short stories by various Japanese writers. This was a 5-star read for me. In a collection like this, obviously there's some stories you enjoy more than others, but one of the things that I really did like about this collection was that before each story you got a couple of pages of a bit of a history and background on the author and where they sat in a literary sense as well, what kind of school of thought they were with. And that helped with reading the stories to get an idea of where they were coming from. So I definitely recommend that if you're interested in Japanese literature. Give it a try. Going back to NetGalley, I read Money Hacks by Lisa Rowan. So this is a non-fiction, self-helpish kind of book. I gave it 4 stars. I read it because it said it was going to offer me loads of ideas for great money saving, putting money away, budgeting and things like that. But I think it does. I think it had a lot of ideas and a lot of them were good ones, but most of them I was already doing, or they weren't relevant because it's an American book and the setup's different from here kind of thing. So I think it could be very beneficial to people, which is why I gave it 4 stars. If you're someone who struggles with saving and budgeting and handling money, then there's definitely some stuff you could learn here that would be useful. For me, it wasn't useful, but only because I was already doing all the practices that would have been relevant to me anyway. So yay me. But yeah, definitely check it out if you're someone who struggles with money and wants some help. It had some good ideas. Sticking with NetGalley still, I read Tempest Cursed by Casey Lannon. Now, this is a book that essentially is a fantasy. I'm not going to use the word retelling. I'm going to say it's loosely based on Wuthering Heights because it's not an exact retelling. This is a story with water gods and ancient water gods, I should say, and coming into conflict with modern society that doesn't want to remember them anymore. I thought it had a lot going for it. For me, this was a 3-star read, though. I loved the premise. I thought some of it worked really well, but once again, I just didn't get deeply into it in the way I wanted to. And I think, although you could see, if you're a Wuthering Heights fan and you know the story really well, you could see some of the parallels. But calling it a retelling and saying it's heavily based on Wuthering Heights is, I think, perhaps a bit misleading. And I think people are going to come to it expecting something that it's not, if that makes sense. I think if you mentioned Wuthering Heights in your afterword and said this was really inspired by this, but didn't make a big point of it in advertising the book, then that would be better, I think. But that's just me. It was an average middle of the road fantasy read. I wanted a little bit more detail in the world building sense on some of the background with the gods and things like that I wasn't given, and I wanted to care about the characters a bit more than I did. So now going to a few that I've bought recently. I'm going to group the next 2 together, which is The Hobbit, Battle of the 5 Armies, Art and Design from the Chronicles, and Smaug, Unleashing the Dragon, both by Daniel Falconer. And these books I bought because when the Hobbit films came out, perhaps I should say first, when the Lord of the Rings films came out, I bought all of the art books, the movie guides, visual companions. I've got the whole set. When the Hobbit came out, it was my intention to do the same. And I do have them all for the first film. But as we got to The Desolation of Smaug, I bought a couple, but I was really tight on money at the time and I just couldn't afford to get them. And I always figured I would do so later. And it's actually, I've realised, become quite hard to get some of them. So I decided not to worry so much about the movie guides or the visual companions, but I did really want to complete the Chronicles art and design type collections, talking about the creation of the special effects and the costumes and things like that. And I had 2 books to go to complete that, which were these 2. So I'm really glad to have finally got them. They're 5-star reads for me. I really love all that behind the scenes detail about films. My husband hates watching all those little documentaries about the making of films that are on the DVDs. He doesn't like to know how it's done. He thinks it spoils the magic. But I actually really enjoy seeing how they created all the effects and things. So these books, as a fan of that kind of thing and a fan of the movies, definitely recommend them. As I said, I'm not sure if I will complete the movie guides and visual companions. If I see them around and can get them for an okay price, I'll complete the set. But otherwise, I'm happy to have at least completed this selection of books. So I also bought Bungo Stray Dogs light novel number 4 by Asagiri Kafka. I have the previous 3 light novels. I've watched the anime, but I haven't read the manga. But I did decide to get the light novels. So this is number 4. This is a story that hasn't been done in the anime, so it was all new material, which was great fun. I enjoyed the story. I thought there was plenty of action, some fun moments, particularly some fun Dazai moments, my favourite character. And all up, I gave this 4.5 stars. I think you probably do need to know about Bungo Stray Dogs before you read this, to have the background on the characters and their powers and how the world works. But if you're already a fan, I definitely recommend it. And another book I bought was The Strange Library by Murukami Haruki. And this actually completes my Murakami collection. I now have all of his works that have been translated into English, or I should say all the fiction. I have a couple of the non-fiction, but the couple of other non-fiction ones don't particularly interest me, so I haven't bothered getting those, but I now have all the fiction that has been translated. And The Strange Library is one aimed a little bit more at younger readers compared to his other work. I gave it 4 stars. I think it's, if you're a younger reader who's perhaps not quite advanced enough for Murakami's other writing, this is probably a really, really lovely introduction piece. It's a bit fantastical. There's a lovely blend of prose and illustration in this book as well. So I think it's perfect for if you want to introduce younger readers to a writer like Murakami, but they're not at a level where they can read Kafka on the Shore or something yet. This would be a really great piece to try. And if you're already a fan, even though it's aimed at a slightly younger audience, it's still really entertaining. And you'll see little bits and pieces that link back to some characters and things that happen in his adult works as well. Going back to NetGalley, I read Koimonogatori Volume 2 by Taguru Toru. I read Volume 1 previously, and this is a boys' love drama. I'm calling it a drama because so far there's not been a lot of romance going on. It's been more about the characters coming to terms with their sexuality, or for the friends of those characters dealing with accepting when you discover that your friend is gay. And I think it's been really nicely handled, very sensitively handled. I think the characters come across well and the situations are interesting, true to life. And I'm really interested. The author said at the end of this one that there is going to be more of a romance element in the next book, which I think is going to be the final book. So I am very interested to see how it's all going to conclude at the end of the day. The only thing that puts me off this, and is the reason it gets 4 stars instead of 5, it is very slow burn. So if you prefer your boys' love with plenty of hot and heavy action early on, it's not for you. But the one thing I struggle with in both Volume 1 and 2 of this is the fact that some of the characters look very similar. And sometimes when you look at the illustrations, it takes you a moment to try and work out which one of them it is and who's speaking. I think the trouble is, because it's very realistic, they can't go all out and do eccentric hairstyles that would help you tell them apart and things like that. So, but because of that, they do look very similar, 1 or 2 of them. So that's the only slight difficulty I have. Going back to books I bought again, I also got the new Volume 29 of Black Butler by Toboso Gana. I'm a huge Black Butler fan, as you will know if you watch any of my videos. And it was great fun to see what happens next in the story, although now, of course, I'm desperate to find out what will happen next again, and I have to wait now for whoever knows how long for the next volume, for Volume 30, which I don't imagine will come out until maybe early next year if I'm lucky. I'll have to have a look when the Japanese releases, because usually it's about 6 months or so after that. But 5 stars again. I mean, I love Black Butler, and it's a great continuation of where we left off last time. Another book I bought was The Shades of Magic, The Still Prince Volume 3, The Rebel Army by V.E. Schwab. And this is the 3rd and final book in her graphic novel series that's a prequel to the Shades of Magic 3-book trilogy in prose. This was a 4-star read for me. I don't think it was as good as the first 2 volumes. I wasn't as invested in what was happening as I was in those. However, as a conclusion to the story, I think it worked well. I'm still a bit iffy about the illustration style. I'm not absolutely in love with it. I don't detest it, but it's certainly not one of my favourite looking graphic novels so far. But I think it was an interesting experiment for V.E. Schwab to go into graphic novels. I think it worked for this story overall. And I know she's planning to do a graphic novel set in the vicious world of, you know, the extraordinary people. And I'm very keen to see what she'll do with that. I do think it's interesting. She's an author who's gone trying to experiment in a few different media. And it's working well, I think, so far. So I'm interested to see what she'll do in the future. She does have some films coming for The Shades of Magic, the original trilogy. So I'm really excited to see what they'll do with that. I just hope they don't wreck it, but fingers crossed. Continuing on anyway with the books, we've just got 4 more to go. Going back to NetGalley, I read Lives and Deaths by Tolstoy. So this is a collection of 4 short stories / novellas by Tolstoy, all around the themes of life and death, as the title suggests. This was a 5-star read for me. A couple of the stories were good. The other couple I really loved. And I think Tolstoy, I've read Tolstoy a fair bit. I've read One Piece, I've read Anna Karenina, all the big fat ones. If you're someone who enjoys the classics but is perhaps put off by the size of some of those books like War and Peace, this is a really nice collection because it gives you an introduction to Tolstoy's writing style without having to get through 900 pages. So I definitely recommend it if you want to try Tolstoy but are not up for a War and Peace marathon session yet. Apologies if you can hear that noise. I did pull the door to, but that's my washing machine that's coming towards the end of its cycle, and it's just gotten a little bit loud there, so sorry if you can hear that rumbling. Gentleman Jim was the next read from NetGalley, and it's written by Mimi Matthews, and this is a historical romance. It's a Regency romance with a bit of a highwayman thing going on, a bit of a hidden identity issue, and a heroine who's being harassed by her new guardian after her father's death and is looking to escape his clutches. And then she falls for a young Viscount who bears a striking resemblance to the lost love of her youth. So that's the basic premise of the story. I won't say too much more and spoiler it. But this was a 4.5-star read for me. It was entertaining. I really liked the characters. Mimi Matthews does a brilliant job of portraying the setting without info dumping. She gets a really great sense of the time period and place in her writing. And definitely recommend it if you like historical romance and particularly Regency romance. Sticking with the Regency romance, we are going to The Vicar and the Rake by Annabel Green, and this is another NetGalley read. This is an historical romance. Again, this was a 4.5-star read for me. A really entertaining story, memorable, well-portrayed characters, a good sense of the period setting without info dumping. And I thought a good balance. This is obviously the MM ones tend to be a bit sexier than the MF ones, or the MF ones that I like to read. I don't really read the bodice ripper types. But I thought the balance was good between the action drama with some sex scenes in between. And as I said, 4.5-star read. So if you like historical MM romance, then this is definitely one I would recommend checking out. And finally, our last one for the month, which I finished only a day or so ago, is The Convenience Store Woman by Murato Sayaka. Now, this is Japanese contemporary literature. I've read one of Murato's other books earlier. In fact, it might even have been this year. Yes, it was. It was earlier this year in March, looking back, called Earthlings, which, if you remember, I really enjoyed. It gave 5 stars to. And Convenience Store Woman, one of her older books, is a 5-star read for me as well. This one I borrowed from the library. It's a very short, quick read. I finished it in one night. It's about 160 pages. And it's looking at both the role of women in modern society, but more importantly, the issue of outsiders and those who don't conform to the expected societal norms. I thought it was really fun. It's a quirky, humorous read that still has a deeper message behind it that comes across really well through those layers of humour and fun. And I'm definitely keen to read more by Murata in the future because I really enjoy her style of prose. It was a 5-star read, as I said, for me, which was a pretty nice way to end today's session before my washing machine completely drowns me out. So I will end there for today. I've got a few big books to tackle as we move into September because I have an arc from the publisher of The Evening and the Morning by Ken Follett, which I will be starting after my current read, which is a library book that I'm just finishing off. So that's a 900 page book. So that one might take me a little while. So I may have fewer to talk about in September, but I will look forward to coming back and talking to you all again then. In the meantime, do follow my channel. I'll have some other content earlier in the month during September, and I hope that we can see you all again soon at the end of next month again for another book wrap up as well. So I'll say goodbye for now, but enjoy your September. I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.